Presentation on tech ethics. This is by Shannon Johnson. So, tech ethics. As an educator, you will be responsible for ensuring your compliance with all district, state, and federal laws and regulations concerning the use of technology in the field of education. Not only this, but you are charged with the technological safety and security of your students. If you aren't already familiar with these laws, regulations, and policies, don't fret. We'll learn all about them today.
Technology gives us power, and power means that we have to make choices that we didn't have to make before. For example, so many questions have come up with medical technology in the last few decades, and so many questions have come up with weapons technologies. What should we be doing with these powers that we have now that we have them? Social media is another prime example of we're still navigating the space of how to behave relative to each other. As we're trying to navigate this new space, we have to ask ourselves, what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is evil in these situations? And those are fundamentally ethical questions.
Indeed. Okay, so moving on to our next section, we're going to take a look at the federal laws. So here we have FERPA, otherwise known as the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and that's a federal law that stipulates who is able to see what parts of a student's record and at what times. This is important to familiarize yourself with as you consider what is posted or made available online and as you monitor students' posts and online activity. If you would like further information about FERPA, if you'd like to read it in its entirety, you can click this link on your own. Okay, that also brings us to SIPA, which is the Children's Internet Privacy Act, and that really is important for many reasons. So this ensures that schools and school districts have software and filters installed to help prevent students from accessing or stumbling upon inappropriate content. And that's also tied to E-rate funding. So in Pinellas County Schools, it does talk about the FEFP formula, which is our funding formula. And in the digital classrooms component of the FEFP formula, Pinellas County Schools has provided $315,626 as their DCP allocation. Funding may be expended on acquiring computer and device hardware and associated operating system software, professional development, and acquiring and maintaining items included in the federal E-rate program. Obviously, all of these things are very necessary to implement a successful digital program. And that does rely on the Pinellas County Schools complying with SIPA. Okay. Here we go to the specific Pinellas County Schools policy. We are going to go into these policies in depth. There are more available. We aren't going to go through every single one of the technology policies, but if you would like to, or if you're feeling curious, you can always go to the District Bylaws and Policies Handbook, which the link is provided here, or you can go to the Technology and Information Systems website by clicking this second link, which will take you just to kind of a short list. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these important policies. So the first one we're going to look at is the use of employees' personal property at work. So you are allowed to bring in your own technology to use. You just have to understand that there will be some limitations in what you can do, and if something happens to your property, you accept that it's yours and you brought it in and took that risk. Okay, so use of multimedia. So this policy really talks about the procedures and the use of multimedia, such as radio, broadcast, audio CDs, sound recordings on cassettes, CDs, computer files, all of those things that you need to know how to use appropriately. So one thing that's important in Pinellas County Schools is that you can only show G-rated movies unless you have a permission slip. So that, again, just continues to help safeguard our children. So communications with parents and students via electronic media, this does get a lot of people into trouble. back in the day, when I grew up, we were a small town community. Everybody knew everybody. We would go to our teachers' houses, and our teachers knew our parents just because they were community members. It's not the same in Pinellas County. It's a very large district, and you have to be very, very careful with all of your communications. Facebook friending, social media contact, even emails, you do need to be careful. So this particular policy goes into detail of what you can and cannot do and kind of gives you some guidelines as far as those ethical boundaries and what you can use your district issued communication devices for. And then this one, so every student and teacher, well, every student grades 3rd grade on up, and every teacher is issued a district-owned laptop or device. And with that comes some responsibilities. So every teacher has to sign a property removal form showing where your computer or your devices will be if they're not on the school grounds and what exactly you're going to be using those for. Students also need to do a property contract so that they can take a computer home for educational purposes, with the understanding that everything they do can be monitored for students and teachers. And then, of course, the computer technology and networks. So this is important because it does talk about how technology technology resources, devices, all of the things encompassed in technology, it's a privilege, not a right. So you can lose that privilege if you are not complying with the district's policies. So the acceptable use policy, many districts have them. Pinellas County Schools does have a acceptable use policy for students and for staff. And this is imperative that everyone using the network's devices, anything, is familiar with the acceptable use policies. So here we go. I'm going to take an in-depth look at this. It's rather long, but we're going to take a look at it. So the Network Internet Acceptable Use Agreement. So before students, staff, parents, anyone can use district devices, you do have to read through, sign, and agree to abide by the acceptable use agreement. Okay. So this does detail what exactly that is, what it looks like, what you can and cannot do, what you understand, the risks that you're assuming, and again it goes into that part that internet's a privilege, not a right. An inappropriate use will result in a cancellation of those privileges. And as a teacher, I have had to do that. I've had a couple of students that have lost either temporarily or for the entire year internet use. I've also had students completely lose privileges of using district electronic devices. So they do enforce it, they do follow through. And then, of course, network etiquette and the services provided. So network etiquette, that seems pretty simple, but this is something that the students and teachers have to sign, showing that they do understand and they accept this, so that if they break this contract or this policy, they understand that they will have those consequences. So things like not revealing personal identifying information, being polite, using appropriate language, that's a big one, not finding or accessing inappropriate material on purpose and engaging in those activities, of course, maintaining privacy and appropriate communications. Then, continuing into those services, that the district makes no warranties of any kind about what it's going to provide for you. So again, it's a privilege, not a right. So just because you're a student or a teacher doesn't automatically mean that the district has to provide you with devices or internet connectivity. It also talks about security. The district does have many safeguards in place to keep students, staff, everyone involved safe. And of course, vandalism. So I have also had students that have vandalized electronics and have lost not only the privilege, but then they also have to pay the district for what they have destroyed. Okay. So this talks about how the student does need to sign that statement so that they understand it and they will abide by it. The parent and guardian must also sign it. And then here are some additional safety measures. This really talks, I put the little arrow in this one to point out that this is where it talks in our district policies about the Children's Internet Protection Act. and what they are doing to ensure that we are following that act and complying. Okay, on we go. So another very important policy in the district is the use of electronic resources. So this is to help us comply with the TEACH Act, and to do that, this is what we're doing, is using this electronic resources policy. So the TEACH Act facilitates and enables the performance and display of copyrighted materials for distance education by accredited nonprofit educational institutions and some government entities that meet the TEACH Act's qualifying requirements. Its primary purpose is to balance the needs of distance learners and educators with their rights of copyright holders. So as a teacher, it's very important that we're incredibly familiar with this TEACH Act and with the use of electronic resources policies so that we don't end up hurting ourselves or someone else. So this is the district's policy. It is more than one slide. Discussing using those things like computers, network, software, internet access, telephones, electronic communication devices, fax machines, and how to use them appropriately without violating any copyright or privacy laws. So here, the first part talks about the property of the district, that there is no expectation of privacy. You are using somebody else's materials, you are using someone else's network, and as such, you don't have specific rights necessarily as far as what the district can see and what they know as far as what you are doing on their devices. So here it is. I wanted to zoom in on that. The scope of the monitoring is unlimited. You understand and you agree if you are using the district's email, if you're using the district's cell phones, if you're using their internet, their computers, that they have ultimate control and they have all the monitoring they would like to do. I did talk briefly with my media specialist about what this looks like. And it actually goes even above administrators. Administrators don't do this monitoring. If you are suspicious of a student or staff member, that gets bumped up to the district, and the district then will decide if they are going to monitor, how active, how often, and what that might look like as it moves forward. Okay. So, of course, it does understand, the district understands that every once in a while you will probably use your district-issued device for personal use, and they do say that's okay if it's incidental personal use, so something like occasional personal communication or just needing to look up something really quickly. Of course, it does need to remain appropriate, but they do understand that that's going to happen and that's okay, as long as that's not all you're using it for and it doesn't get inappropriate or excessive. And then they outline the unacceptable uses for any of their devices, which are pretty clear-cut. Okay, and then here that list continues. And this is where it also outlines that employees have the responsibility to supervise students and the staff that they are supervising, and that must be done by the supervisor. So if you're a teacher, you are in charge of supervising your students. If you're an administrator, you need to have some idea and be relatively aware of what your staff is using their computers for, and just keep an eye on that and report it to the district if you feel that isn't warranted. Here in the second part, it talks about confidential information, and here I added another arrow because this is where the district refers to their compliance with the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act and the Protection of People Rights Amendment Act. So again, keeping everything confidential, only sharing what needs to be shared with who needs to have it, if they are allowed to have it. Then touching on copyright infringement again, so policy 2531, copyrighted works, discussing which we can and cannot use in an educational environment. And then the charges. So the district assumes no responsibility for unauthorized charges made by employees, including but not limited to credit card charges and long-distance telephone, equipment line, anything that you do that exceeds what the district has agreed to do or pay for, they're not going to pay for it, which makes sense. Okay. And then this is the very end of this policy, talking about how the district is not warranting the service that they're providing to you. So you're agreeing that using that internet, you might get a virus, you might get something if you're using your personal equipment, and if that's the case, you took that risk. Now, if it's on a district computer, they have a lot of firewalls and safeguards, so it's unlikely that you would get something like that. But if you did, then you could just take their device to their technology department and they would take care of it. But that is an understanding that if you're using your own property on their network, they're not going to warranty or cover anything that might happen because of it. And then this very last part, penalties for noncompliance. Obviously, if you fail to comply with these policies, it may result in suspension or revocation of the user's privilege of access and may subject the user to civil liability or criminal charges. Employees may also be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination as defined in board policy and or the collective bargaining agreement dealing with staff discipline. So the district has been very, very clear in all of their policies of exactly what you can and cannot do. And so this is just them reminding you, you know, and it is your responsibility. Okay, and so that brings us to the end. That is the references. There are plenty of references here. Should you need any additional information about the TEACH Act, FERPA, SIPA, or any of the district's policies. All right, and that concludes this presentation. Thank you.